Peter. Come on. Helping you get this thing started. Thank you. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. So, I think this is our 20th Cyber Houston Happy Hour. And thank you all for making it a success. Every time we have a the base, the people who are coming frequently keeps growing, and then we get new faces. So this has been really exciting. Let's just take a quick show of hands and raise your hand if you've been here before. Excellent. Raise your hand if this is your first time. Fantastic. It always runs about 60-40. Great job. Thank you so much. So, let me tell you, I'm Ramesh Verma, I'm CEO of Blue Lance, and it is my extreme pleasure to host you all here today. A little bit about Cyber Houston. Cyber Houston is committed to ensuring that the citizens of the Greater Houston region are educated and prepared to conduct their day-to-day lives and cyber activities in a safe and secure manner. It is our intention to encourage conversations and cybersecurity awareness in a relaxed setting. And we're right here at the Houston Technology Center. Thank you, Deborah. And thanks for being here. And the goal is to really promote, it is okay to network, because that's the purpose. We want to know who our community is, and we want to build a community that is aware of each other. It is amazing how powerful it is that when you need something done, to have to just to know who you can call. It has worked out for us several times, and so we're very proud to do this for the community and start building the community. It is our intention to convey information and learning from various groups and organizations such as the Greater Houston Partnership Cybersecurity Task Force, ISACA, InfraGuard, and others. Please do follow us on Twitter at cyber_Houston. Use the hashtag CyberHouston. Please do spread the word, encourage other people to come and learn and share. A little bit about tonight. I will speak and bore you for about another 5 to 7 minutes. But that pays the bills, right? And then we will have our speaker for tonight. We will then, after he will speak for about maybe 20-25 minutes, and then you get to ask questions for about 10-15 minutes. Don't be shy, ask a lot of questions. We do have 2 traveling mics, so today we may have 1 traveling mic, so try to use the mic, let the mic come to you and ask the question, especially if people are asking questions in the front. It is very hard, the room is very dense, and so it's very hard for the people at the back to hear your questions. So try to use the mic. If you can cooperate with us on that, that would be great. And please consume all the food and beverages in the building. We have been asked to communicate that, so please do that. And then after the speaker and the Q&A, we will have a raffle. We have 2 sponsors. They have about 3 gift cards and prizes each. So we'll have a little rah-rah-rah and have some fun. And then we hope to call it a night somewhere around 7:05. But you're welcome to stay for a little bit and network some more. But we do want to try to get out of here by about 7:20, 7:25. So that's the plan. Events like this are not possible without sponsors. So we want to thank our sponsors, Renica App Builders and Blue Lance. You can give them a hand. And also want to say a very special thank you. And the seats right up here, front row. Our community partners, Houston Technology Center. This is the building that you're in, and they allow us to use this lovely multi-purpose room, and it's all free for the community. So thank you, HTC, and thank you, Deborah. The Center for Houston's Future, which is an affiliate of the Greater Houston Partnership, and its role is to look out at issues which are 5 years plus. It's called Looking Out Over the Horizon. And they have taken on cybersecurity as one of those longer-term issues. So we appreciate their support. I would be remiss if I didn't say that I'm also honored to be the chairman of Center for Houston's Future this year. So thank you. And then the Greater Houston Partnership. The Greater Houston Partnership is the Chamber of Commerce, World Trade, Economic Development, Public Policy, all rolled into one. And I have the privilege of chairing the Cybersecurity Task Force at the partnership, in addition to being on the executive committee. And so there are a few members of the Cybersecurity Task Force here today. So if y'all would please stand and be recognized, please. Excellent. If you could just stand for a minute, I just want to go around the room. Angela Hahn, Infragard. Lilith Peter Thomas with Movings, and Taylor, our speaker today with AT&T. Over the past, the Cybersecurity Task Force was formed in 2013, and for the past 3 years, a lot of good work has been done. And there is this guide that we normally place at the back, and I think it's almost out. But this is, while it says 2015, it was really released at the end of 2015, so it's a little over a year old, and this was the 3rd edition. We are currently working on the 4th edition, and that will be rolled out hopefully towards the end of April. In this guide was developed through the the membership of this task force is across multiple industries and from the business leaders who are in charge of cybersecurity. The intent of this guide was to provide education to small and medium-sized businesses on how to better secure their infrastructures and become good, worthy partners to the enterprise. While that was the primary focus, it's interesting that the work has now been turned around and enterprises are using this body of work to start creating the requirements for small and medium-sized businesses to be worthy partners. So it's kind of served a double purpose, which is good in a way. This guide talks about the general cybersecurity principles, and then it talks about sector by sector recommendations. And the idea is to be cost effective and economical. And Roger, thanks for all the work that you've done with the Infragard SIGs and all to put the material out. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the end of this book, towards the back end of this book, I used to know pages, I think it's 68 and 69, is a self-assessment. It's a 19-point self-assessment that's been developed. And it is meant to give the leader, the business leader in the organization, the tools to assess their organization and start a conversation with their IT folks or their managed service providers to say, how are we doing? This guide is available at www.houston.org/cybersecurity. It's available online. And the assessment is also available online at www.houston.org/cybersecurity. The guide has been downloaded over 3,000 times, and the assessment has been taken now over 4,000 times. I got those numbers today. So it's definitely getting out there, and we help, and we really appreciate everybody's help and support. So as I mentioned, the 4th edition will be coming out in April. And then many of y'all were present at the breakfast with Congressman McCall in October. And at that event, we published this guidance. I'm sorry it's so crumpled, but that's about the only version I have left. It's the cybersecurity for the board of directors of small and medium-sized businesses. What you need to know to protect yourself and your company. So as you can see, we've got the detail, and then we've got the summary guidance for the board. So from a governance and oversight perspective, this provides general governance and oversight. This material is also going to be available on that website very shortly. And then that brings me to our speaker today. What we try to do is bring all our members of our task force here and provide them a platform to speak as subject matter experts from their particular lens and their particular industries. Today, it is my honor to present to you Taylor Landin of AT&T. Taylor and actually Taylor was the liaison at public policy at the partnership when the cybersecurity task force was just getting ginned up. And I remember our first meeting, Taylor. You came to that meeting, you shook my hand and said, "I am someone you need to know." When you see Taylor up here in a few minutes, you'll realize how humble he is, and that was something he would never say. So that was just a teasing joke. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Taylor. Taylor is Regional VP of External Affairs for AT&T. He joined AT&T from the Greater Houston Partnership, where he was Vice President of Public Policy. While at the partnership, Taylor helped drive the strategic priorities for the organization and also developed new advocacy and coalition building capabilities, including the creation of a regional chamber network in Southeast Texas that reaches over 30 other chamber organizations representing 24,000 businesses and over 1 million employees. So he definitely knows how to scale. Prior to the partnership, Taylor worked for a number of elected officials and political campaigns, including Vice President Dick Cheney, Senator John Cornyn, Congressman Pete Olson, Mitt Romney, and John McCain. In addition to his campaign work, Taylor consulted for a leading political data company that uses big data applications and predictive analytics to transform political communications and fundraising. Taylor was recently nominated to serve on the board of directors for the Texas Association of Business, in addition to serving on the Government Relations Advisory Committee for the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. Taylor graduated from the University of Texas at Austin, where he was a football letterman. He lives in Sugar Land with his wife and 3 children, a 3-year-old and 22-month-old twins. Please welcome Taylor.
So when Umesh first invited me and said it was an evening event, my first thought was, I can get out of bath at bedtime. I'm in. So I appreciate the invitation, Umesh. You know, I think it's worth mentioning about Umesh. He is the tech community here in Houston is really lucky to have somebody like Umesh. He, when I was at the partnership, I mean, I saw firsthand how dedicated he was to this issue, and it takes people like Umesh with the persistence and the dedication to really keep stuff at the forefront, and so it's a big credit to Umesh for that. So I I don't know much, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not here to talk to you about the issue, in-depth policy analysis related to cybersecurity. What I do know and am comfortable with is the political side of this equation. And we've seen over the last, certainly the last year with what's been going on during the presidential elections, where cybersecurity took a front row seat in everything that took place during the elections. And it's becoming such a big topic area that I believe organizations, specifically like Cyber Houston, have an opportunity to really try to educate individuals about what is cybersecurity, what are cyber issues, what does that mean, and it's organizations like this that if you're not engaged and involved, then somebody else is going to come in and fill that space and define the issue for you. And I would argue it's better for professionals like you guys to fill that space. So Umesh mentioned some of my background. Had I known you were going to read that, I wouldn't have sent that over. Can everybody hear okay? That's not where are you coming up? Okay. So I have been lucky to spend most of my career kind of at the intersection of where politics is bumping up against tech and data. In one of my first gigs in a role where actually what I would consider more substantive, not just the entry level grunt work, was 2008. I spent the summer of 2008 in the basement of the Republican National Committee building models and typing out program language in FoxPro. If anybody remembers FoxPro relational database software. So I learned firsthand kind of the importance of. I mean, that was at the time where I remember sitting there and there's literally rows of racks. All that stuff now is up in the cloud. That was just 8 years ago. And then between the 2008 and 2012 presidential cycles, as Umesh mentioned, I worked for a political data company, and we used predictive analytics to try to build donor models that then we deployed in direct mail. And I was heavily involved in the data acquisition side of that, building the national voter file to power a lot of that. So even though I come from a very politically minded background, I know just enough about the tech and data side to be dangerous. And then in 2012, I got a call from friends in Boston that were running Romney's campaign and said, hey, will you come up and try to apply the success that you've had in direct mail fundraising through the email channel? And so I spent 2012 cycle in Boston building models, establishing the email delivery infrastructure, and then ultimately sending emails. So we ended the campaign for the project that I was working on, sending over 500 million emails, and it was a massive undertaking, and something that we were pretty proud of to be able to achieve positive ROI on the fundraising side by the end of the campaign. So, and political operatives have to work between campaigns. So in there, I also worked for Senator Cornyn and worked for Pete Olson and then worked in legislative affairs in the Bush White House. And I mention all that not just to give you guys the biographical sketch, but because having been on the political side and then also on the policy side, I have an appreciation for the different for not only the different pressures that elected officials face, right? And so they have the political pressure, and then they also have the policy-making, legislative pressure that is just constant in their lives. And now at AT&T, my role is to be represent the company in the legislature, and then also be the representative for the company here in Southeast Texas. And as I was going through looking at stuff in preparation for this evening, we have as a company, we put out a bunch of different reports that look very similar to the report that Umesh and the task force put together, the partnership. And what's interesting though about AT&T is that the scale in which we operate is just it's mind blowing. I wrote down some of the numbers. I mean, so we've got over 300,000 employees worldwide, and we've got 147 billion in annual revenue, and 3.5 million business customers, and we service most of the Fortune 1000. And here's the thing that I don't have the intellectual capacity to figure out what this means, but 118 petabytes of data transverse our network every day. So I don't know, how to describe that to you all. I remember when I first got a hard drive that could hold a terabyte that sat on my desk, and I was excited about that, and didn't even come close to filling that up, right? And so I don't know what 118 petabytes of data looks like, but it's a lot. So there's things that that kind of gives us as a company the ability to have insights into the threat landscape, in our 24-hour monitoring and all that stuff that is a big part of what we do. That's really interesting. So you guys jump on there, look at those reports, and may have some interesting insights just by virtue of the massive scale in which we operate. So so let me stop there and shift gears a little bit. So what are we, as I said, my role is to represent the company in front of the legislature, but having had experience on the federal side, I can kind of speak about what is the cyber security, cyber issue landscape look like. We'll start at the federal level and then jump over to the state level, and then hopefully have a conversation about sort of the role that this group can play, and the Houston tech community in general can play in shaping public policy. So when you think about the election of Donald Trump, that even for someone obviously, I can't hide behind my. It's pretty obvious that I've worked in Republican politics my whole life. And even for somebody who's been around, I remember when we were in 2008, we wouldn't even have dreamt to put Wisconsin and Michigan on the battleground map for McCain, and then same would have been true back in 2004, even when President Bush was pulling down 30%, 30 plus, I think upwards of 38% of the Hispanic vote in the 2008 cycle. I mean, to think about the tectonic shift that occurred in the electorate, anyone who said that they predicted that, it's just not true. And so anyone who claims to know what's going to happen in Washington in the next 4 years is also equally probably disingenuous. So what is the federal landscape? Who the hell knows, right? I mean, there's really no way to predict this sort of thing, but I thought that I might talk a little bit about some of the dynamics that exist, and then some things that for tech professionals like you guys wouldn't spend any time thinking about. So one of the dynamics that I think is really interesting and to watch it play out will be, I think we'll wind up telling the story of the next 4 years in a big way. So if you think about Trump was elected, he is now the elected leader of a party that is dominated by a less government, less is more ideology, right? And I think that you can make an argument that he actually views government as a useful tool in some cases. right? And so, that's completely at odds with some of the more conservative Republicans that were certainly running, party in general, who sort of had their origins back to the 2010 Tea Party movement, where, you had people that were really wanting to run for office, get elected, but actually had no interest in governing, right? Because they have a fundamental sort of disbelief in government. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic to see how, Trump's ideological shape forms. So that's kind of a macro point. Specifically related to cyber, I think we all need to pay very close attention to the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC is effectively operating under a 1934 statute, Telecommunications Act of 1934. It was rewritten in '96 to include such words as the internet and the World Wide Web. And so, but it effectively is still, a 90-year-old, 80-year-old statute. And that is having, so the FCC plays a huge role in being the, Congress will pass a law, and then the regulatory regime plays a huge role in figuring out what happens next. So I think the appointments there are really, really important. The other thing that is potentially underappreciated is that you have, you need to keep a real close eye on some of the appointments made at the deputy secretary and assistant secretary levels across the administration, because most of the secretary level appointments that President-elect Trump has made don't necessarily have governing experience, and so a lot of executive experience in that group, but don't really maybe know how to make the wheels of government really turn. And so that's going to be really interesting, because those deputy and assistant secretaries are going to be the ones that really are driving things, because they're going to be pushing up, policy recommendations, strategy on how to get stuff done up to the secretary level and then on to the White House, right? So that'll be really interesting to watch how that plays out, and does he put people there that are respected? Or are they going to, who does he decide to put in those positions is a big deal. The other thing that has gotten some airtime that I think is really interesting is in the Senate. You have, so Republicans have 51 seats. That's obvious, but what's less obvious is the 13 senators that are up for re-election in 2018 that are from states that Trump either won or narrowly lost. And then that includes 5 senators from states that Trump won by 19 points or more. So you put those people, you add 51 plus 5, you've got 56, so then you just have to peel off 4 more votes to get your supermajority of 60 to get stuff done. Because the House is just going to be lobbing bills over to the Senate, and it's going to be a matter of do they have the votes there in the Senate to get them to the president's desk. So that'll be really interesting to figure out. And this is way down in the weeds, but it's worth mentioning. There's a lot of people that are talking about all of these things that are going to get done in the first 100 days or first 6 months or what have you. There are some real limitations on the amount of, or the number of bills that can be entertained on the floor in the House and the Senate. There's arcane legislative procedure that governs all of that, and it literally takes hours to get stuff done. And so when you start calculating hours, there's just not enough floor time to get all of this done. So the administration is going to have to be very deliberate about what it decides to lead with, because whatever, he's probably going to get 3, maybe 4 big issues. And healthcare is going to be one, trade is going to be one, so that leaves 2 others. Maybe. So how does that play out in terms of priorities? And we're going to learn really quick, just because there's the floor time that governs both bodies is just extremely limited. So, and the other thing that is not necessarily directly politically related, but on the media side, I think it's going to be interesting to watch to see how media, there's all this talk about fake news. I'm not talking about that, but I think it's interesting to see how the media covers cyber-related events, right? You've got, I don't think it's enough just for the headline to read the DNC was hacked. Like, what does that mean? How did it happen? What are the ramifications? There's so many things that the reporters and the news organizations really need to figure out how they're going to cover it. It's not unlike the issues that a group like this would face. Like, how do you produce a piece of collateral that's going to be consumed by millions of people? I hope we get millions of people looking at cyber use and stuff in mesh. But how do you distill that down into something that is digestible, but also worthy of the technical elements of the issue? So I'll kind of stop there at the federal level and talk briefly about the state. The landscape of this. Yes, ma'am.
I don't mean to interrupt.
Please
Is it
do.
okay?
Absolutely.
So I don't know if this is a question, comment, and I would like to hear what you sound like you're very informed around this, and this is cyber security related. And is anyone else as surprised as I am how unprotected and how infant stages our government is with cybersecurity? And like you're talking about these bills, I mean, this doesn't need a bill to protect our country. What are your thoughts on that? And
yeah, I mean, I think that you're going to see government doesn't always have, it's very good at reacting, it's not very good at being proactive. So I think that, perhaps the events of the last year they've certainly got people's attention, there's no doubt about that. What is the government's response to that? I think is yet to be seen. I think you're going to see, I know that Chairman McCall on the Homeland Security Committee has fashioned himself and become quite literally an expert on cybersecurity. It'll be interesting to see in the last 2 years of his chairmanship if he decides to, how he decides to proceed. You have outside groups like the DNC, the RNC, even somebody like a well-regarded trade association that represents major companies, right? Like they're susceptible to a security breach, and so what steps do they take? I think that's a constant. Some of you guys that are in this space would have a keen appreciation for the fact that how do you sell something that is, you need this because something might happen, right? I mean, it's just difficult, and so I think that it's I don't know. It's the simplest answer,
even if
really.
you back that up, before you buy anything, the biggest thing is security is people and policies.
Yeah.
You don't even have to layer in a firewall or antivirus. It's people and policies.
Yeah.
You can't get those two.
Well, I mean, a perfect example is my information was compromised in the OPM breach. At the time, I was an employee of the United States Senate, and so it's in there somewhere, which includes probably some. I didn't have clearance, but I had the minimum level to be in and around constitutional officers, and I mean that had that security check. I'm sure was a part of that personnel file, which is a big. So anyway, I think it's something that Congress is going to wrestle with. in a real way, just because they're forced to. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better explanation for you. So let's jump over to the state level real quick. The interesting thing about the state level is that the landscape is really not well defined. You don't really have someone beating the drum in the legislature for a pure cybersecurity piece of legislation, so it's not very well defined. But that doesn't mean that the regulatory and rulemaking process is not. It's kind of always churning in the background. And the reason why there are some bills out there. There's a cyberbullying bill. There's electromagnetic pulse bill. There's some other more technical bills that are in front of the legislature that have been introduced at this point. With them just coming in on Tuesday, it's kind of anybody's guess where some of those go at this point. But it'll be, I think so that's a good kind of stepping off point to talk about the role that a group like this can play. So some of the legislative process that takes place in Austin, in order to get something done, you have to have a champion that is willing to fight through all of the different parts of the process that will hang up any part of a bill, right? Because the legislative process is inherently inefficient, slow. You can kill a bill a lot easier than you can pass a bill. And so you really need someone who is a champion for a cybersecurity issue or set of policies or what have you. And quite frankly, I don't know that person exists in the legislature today. And so I hope that a group like Cyber Houston will think long and hard about how to cultivate that champion and how to leverage some of the collective expertise of a room like this to help elected officials sort of define their worldview as it relates to cyber issues. It's incredibly important. If you think about like transportation policy in the legislature, Senator Nichols, boom, he's got it, right? He is the champion for transportation funding policy. He's the guy, right? Education, school choice, Dan Patrick, he's your guy. Economic development, Jim Murphy, he's your guy, right? There's really not one for cybersecurity, and I think that's a huge gap for this for the tech community to try to bridge over the next few years, especially as more and more of these issues kind of get into the mainstream of policy making. And it's one of those things where a lawmaker, even if they're not a doctor, they consume healthcare. They know what it means to their family, right? Even if they're not, an engineer, they drive on the roads, they figure out where the bottlenecks are, and they get mad about it, and they go to Austin, and they do something about it, right? It's less clear what cyber security, cyber issues, what does that mean? And so somebody has to go in and kind of help shape and mold those positions that these lawmakers are taking, because one thing's true, nothing in politics happens by accident. And so somebody else is in there trying to shape opinion. And I would argue that a group like Cyber Houston really, it's in their best interest to get heavily involved in trying to shape that opinion. And in a group like this, you don't have to, it doesn't mean that you have to go, register to be a lobbyist and run around the Capitol for 140 days every other year. It means that it's creating an environment where conversations can take place, where lawmakers can come in and learn and be educated on what does cybersecurity mean? What are some of the more technical elements? How does that translate into the policy making space? There's all sorts of things that you can do And, for a great example is, does anybody know who the chair of the IT caucus in the Texas House of Representatives is?
Does anybody know there was one?
Good place to start. He's a guy that he represents Spring Branch. It's like 10 minutes from here, right? And he cares deeply about these issues. And he is, his name's Dwayne Bohack, good, nice guy. He's someone that would love to have someone that is an expert in this field come and talk to him, right? Teach him. And the other thing that this community has going for it specifically is, one, you bring value because you're incredibly knowledgeable, and the second thing is, you're incredibly knowledgeable. You're more often than not small business and entrepreneurial in nature, which means jobs, which means there's a good story to tell as a politician. And then secondly, y'all are cool. Believe it or not, you're cool. And elected officials would love to share in that aura, right? They want to be able to go back to their constituents and say, I know the latest and greatest in technology. I know, you guys, you just have that ability to leverage the cachet of tech in a real tangible way, and it's incredibly valuable to an elected official. So I hope that this group will think about that and think about how to leverage some of their collective capacity to get to know some of these people that represent you, and then go about the business of getting to know them and bringing some of your knowledge to bear to help shape the policy. So I'll stop there and take any questions that you guys might have. Linwood, Mr. AT&T.
Sure. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
let me get a, hold on.
Yeah.
So, just for the group, the survey that you might look at that was appointed by the governor's office was the infectious disease group when we had the Zika and Ebola. And so there's already a precedence for coming from the governor's office, a special appointed group that may be bipartisan, not necessarily Senate and House, but it may drive that first part of education that then can lead towards bills. So that could be a great predicate, and we have the leadership of that group here at the Texas Medical Center. So if there was like, well, how did this get started? That may be a predicate group or case study for this group, maybe approaching the governor's office, start education, and maybe for, 2019, the legislature.
Most of the best,
Yeah.
most policies that actually become law take a number of sessions to actually come to fruition. So, if the people that think that they can just walk into Austin on day one of the legislature and get something done, they're typically confronted with a different reality. And so that interim period, 18 months, where people assume that they're not actually working, it's not true. They are, and that's when the groundwork and foundation for everything that happens in session gets laid. So,
Here comes a C question.
yeah, it is my AT&T colleague, so I planned it.
It was pertaining to the question that was asked earlier. And I think one thing that we forget, we have to remember that we are private citizens. So there's a lot of military and government organizations and cybersecurity agencies that actually monitor security a lot more than we know. What they say on the news is a lot of it should be broadcasted to everybody. It's how can we protect our country if we let everybody know how we protect our country. So a lot of that information we won't know. And believe me, a lot of the country act just as bad as us. And we blocked a lot of traffic. You don't hear about a lot of military bases being taken over, information being taken. A lot of you guys at TSSC accuracy are higher. So when you look at the news, you have to remember that a lot of this information, they can't tell us. So, I mean, maybe at the presidential level higher than them, they can't let us know that information.
If you'll will state your name, please.
Sid Prasanna with Flex Secure. Mesh with the permission for startups. This is my first time here. There's a Department of Homeland Security fund for cybersecurity startups. And they have an event on 23rd of January inviting cybersecurity startups to go in and provide some information. There is a significant funding operation happening, and so if any cybersecurity startups are here, that would be a good option for them.
There was another one, I think.
Yeah, is there a policy approach at the state and federal level that AT&T tends to support with regards to this?
Federally, we do support the NIST standards, and then at the state level, there's all manner of, like, Department of Information Resources and things like that put out a host of guidance, recommendations, regulations on how data is handled, and we intend to comply with it. Question?
I'm very curious about your feedback to AT&T. Obviously, you know a lot about this more than most of us. Is the future bright for the company? Does this bode ill or well?
This is being recorded, right?
We can turn it off.
No, I mean, I'm glad you asked. You know, we're in the, just right in the middle of incredible innovation that doesn't always get a lot of attention because we are most present in people's minds as their the iPhone in their hands, right? And the monthly bill that they pay to support that. Some of the incredible stuff that the company's been working on, software-defined networking is big. So taking all of the traditional elements of the rack that's needed to create the network is all becoming virtualized, which means that the security elements of that are also being virtualized, which is an incredible step for it's it's more efficient. It's lower costs over time, and so yeah, I mean, and then you take the Time Warner merger. I mean, I'm not going to get out ahead of any of our leadership, but I do think that as the media landscape is sort of upended over and over and over again, the adage of content is king is I think appropriate, and so we're definitely moving in the direction of being an entertainment company, so that you can have your device anywhere you go and be a seamless experience for you to be able to watch television, have access to your devices, and be a seamless experience across all of them. So yeah, I mean, I think everyone certainly who works inside the company would be very bullish about the next few years. I think it's going to be exciting. Thanks for letting me do the commercial.
Questions from this side of the room?
I'm on this side of the circle.
Hello. Yeah, just for the record, I'm a AT&T customer. I'm happy with it. But no, I like how AT&T now has gone from. Yeah. No, I like how it's gone from and I've I think maybe 7-8 years. I like how I had like all the customer care service we were on it for like 5-6 years back, to even like now. I can like take most care of things from like my app or, you know, like even like through text just came my bill. This camera I don't work for you, and I wasn't paid to sales. But my real question is the gentleman mentioned about the startups, the security startups. So if you were an entrepreneur, you know, getting to find space or a startup in the cybersecurity space, and you know, if you want to offer a service that could benefit enterprise or other people, do you have any suggestions for that?
You know, you're asking an obvious business to answer a business question. You know, I think that I mean, I would just take that answer in the direction of engagement. Try to figure out where there are needs in the marketplace, and it happens through groups like this. It happens by, you know, paying attention to what's going on at DHS related to grant opportunities. I mean, there's any number of avenues you can take, but you could. My advice isn't going to be worth what it's not going to be worth much to you. Yes, sir.
Maybe to clarify that, do you know of any business incubators? Answer this question.
The Houston Technology Center.
So I had a question. My name is Wes Elliott. It's my first time here. So do you know of any legislation or any thoughts being pushed through federally or on a state level to cultivate people that are in cybersecurity or starting cybersecurity in changing the way, or at least having a more well-defined scope of what is and what isn't allowed for people to do? So currently, it's pretty vague, and essentially it's, if you touch something that's not yours, you're a criminal and the feds can knock on your door, right? Even if you're the most well-mannered person that really wants to help people and you want to help the public and all that, doesn't matter, you can have the feds knocking on your door if you attempt anything that's not on your machine. Obviously, this doesn't bode well for people that actually want to help make a difference on a day-to-day level. Is there anything going on right now to at least define this in a better way and help cultivate the small person to help the government or anything?
So not that I'm specifically aware of, but I'll share with you a story that tells you how important it is, or demonstrates how important it is for different communities and issues to engage with their elected officials. So there was a member of the legislature that a group of chemical companies came to him and said, hey, listen, we have a big problem with drones flying over our facilities. It creates a security risk, a safety risk. So can we figure out a way to create effectively no-fly zones and on top of critical infrastructure? Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Let's figure out how to do it. That member would have never known that that was a problem unless there were relationships in place for him to walk in, for the chemical companies to walk in and say, hey, look, this is an issue that we think that the state of Texas should solve. And it's now law. So that was, that's just an example of, I don't know that that's on, I highly doubt that's on anybody's radar. And so, you walking into someone's office, building a relationship, and then being able to tell him your experience, it leads places. So, I would, that engagement is really, really important, and I hope you'll do that.
Taylor, thank you so much. Let's give Taylor a big hand. Very different speech today, talk today than normal. Wouldn't you say that?
I said this.
And you sensed it?
Yeah, I said this.
Which NIST?
Right. Talk about normally, right?
What is NIST? Which framework are you talking? 850. Okay. I hope y'all really enjoyed the talk. Different talk, policy-oriented. You can see that Taylor is a real policy wonk in addition to being a lobbyist. So thank you so much, Taylor. And you know, I don't think you ever, I think you referenced your material.
I
You didn't say anything. You want to say anything about
No,
that?
no, I'm good, I'm good, seriously.
Okay. All right. So now we have our raffles that everybody is waiting for breathlessly. So let's have our first sponsor up here, Renee Adler, Rainbow Burma.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Rego Burma. I'm the co-founder of Renega App Builders. We develop mobile applications and web applications for businesses. We have a very simple 6-step process so that our clients can follow along easily. Our first step is to brainstorm, flesh out your idea, and understand your pain point. We then sit down and do a scope of work with workflows so that we understand all the functionalities and creative stuff that you would like to have in your app. After the scope has been finalized, we then go into the visualization process, which is very easy. We upload all the screens into a prototype tool that you're able to access from anywhere, whether it's your desktop, your tablet, so you don't have to worry about constantly coming and meet with us. The next step is the programming and coding phase, where we code the screens that you've agreed on in the visualization process. At that point, we then upload your app into test flight if you're doing an iOS app, and send out builds until we have the acceptance phase. And of course, we then offer continued ongoing support. So if you have any questions about mobile apps for your business, please come and talk to me. So now I think we're going to do the fun part, which is the raffle. The first card that will be raffled off is a $15 Starbucks card.
Harry Kohler.
Harry. Oh.
Yeah. Look hard. That's right, I like that. What are we supposed to do now?
Harry, can you sit on this side so it's fine or? No. Thank you.
The next gift card is a $15 Target gift card.
Jill Ominger?
Yeah, she just left, yeah.
Must be present to win. Jessica Hoover.
Jessica's here. Yay!
15 days of the dollar store.
Oh.
Scoot over.
Yeah, no light.
Yep.
And the big winner is a $50 Nordstrom's card.
Wow. George Collier.
Your wife will thank you.
Again.
You know where it's going.
Yeah, I know.
See what every time.
Well, I mean, $50 is going to the wife, come on. Didn't work for me.
Hey, Mackenzie with Blue Lens.
Hey everybody, Happy New Year. Everyone is off to a fabulous start in 2017. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Blue Lance, we are headquartered right here in lovely Houston, Texas. We've been in business for 30 years, and we have our software solutions deployed across 19 different industries and 40 countries around the world. To give you a little bit of an idea of our software, so it helps with the safekeeping of digitally managed assets. And what happens with our software is we assess, we remediate, and we continuously monitor Windows applications and platforms. So with that, if you have any questions or would like an assessment, please come see anybody wearing a lovely Blue Lance name tag. We'd be honored to help you. All right, so first one for me is going to be I'm going to do Target first, $15. Who do we have?
Jimmy Dennis.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, $15 Starbucks.
How about Kevin Hall?
Okay, and last but not least, I do not have a $50 Nordstrom card. I've got Best Buy.
Alexander Baker.
Nobody? Up?
All right, let's build. Brian Borges.
Thank you very much.
All right. Oh, I've got one more.
Are you gonna?
Yeah. So if anybody would be interested in sponsoring Cyber Houston, has any questions about the upcoming conference that we have in April, I would love to answer any of those questions. This is my contact information where you can reach me. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's right about 7 o'clock, and we're going to call it a night. Thank you again, Taylor. Thank you, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you. It was awesome.